Mustafar, 19 BBY. The Separatist Council is dead. Darth Vader contacts Emperor Palpatine, receives his orders, and transmits a single signal through the master control network of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. The novel Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader, fills in what the film doesn't show. On planets as distant as Murkhana, droids mid-stride and mid-firefight go silent simultaneously. Not an automated failsafe triggered by the Council's deaths, a deliberate transmission, a decision. The Separatist Droid Army's Legends documentation describes it as comprising quintillions of active units by the war's end, a number so large it's almost meaningless until you try to parse it as individual machines, each carrying several years of accumulated operational experience, each conducting routine battlefield communication in the seconds before that signal arrived. What nobody interrogated at the time was what those machines had become. This is the case for the B-1 battle droid, a weapon system that began as a security drone on Trade Federation ships, accumulated something that looked disturbingly like a self across 3 years of open warfare, and was then discarded twice, once by an emperor who found it inconvenient, once by the franchise that created it. Both decisions had consequences. One may have cost the galaxy a war. The story starts at Naboo, 32 BBY, with a droid the historical record names OOM-9. The OOM series variants that fought the invasion of Naboo operated without any capacity for independent thought. Every decision passed through a central control computer aboard a Lucrehulk-class droid control ship in orbit. OOM-9 commanded the Trade Federation ground assault on the Gungan Grand Army and executed deliberate battlefield deception. He ordered his armored assault tanks to hold fire, waited until the Gungans believed the tide was turning, then deployed the multi-troop transports against the exposed lines. Complex tactical coordination, executed entirely through centralized processing, no individual cognition required. Then Anakin Skywalker accidentally fired proton torpedoes into the control ship's reactor, and every network droid on Naboo fell over at once. The vulnerability was total and undeniable. Between 32 and 22 BBY, Bactoid engineers rebuilt the standard B-1 from the inside out. The Star Wars Character Encyclopedia confirms the result directly. Later B-1 droids were capable of independent thought, though limited in scope. They no longer required a command signal to function. The CIS's own canon documentation on the Central Control Computer System confirms the change. Later B-1 models did away with needing a command signal, though an officer could still use centralized coordination if desired. The catastrophic flaw that ended the Battle of Naboo was engineered out before a single shot was fired on Geonosis. That hardware revision is the hinge point of everything that follows, because limited independent thought, stretched across 3 years of escalating combat complexity and chronic maintenance neglect, produced something the engineers at Bactoid never budgeted for. The primary Legends record on the B-1 series documents what emerged across the Clone Wars. Distinct vocalizations of fear, confusion, and excitement registering in audible tones. Self-preservation instincts strong enough that B-1 units would attempt escape from certain destruction situations rather than comply with suicidal orders. The canon description frames this as droids focusing on self-preservation and actively attempting to avoid destruction. Excessive situational commentary, units narrating their own circumstances and registering surprise in ways that served no tactical function. The CIS's preferred rationalization was maintenance neglect and cognitive overload. Units tasked with increasingly specialized roles without adequate system upgrades, logic modules exceeding capacity, personality behaviors emerging as a data corruption byproduct. That explanation is mechanically plausible. It also doesn't fully account for what happens in the first season of the Clone Wars, during the liberation of Ryloth. In Liberty on Ryloth, a B-1 explicitly distinguishes its generation from the Phantom Menace-era OOM models. The documented line, "Not us, we're independent thinkers." The surrounding units respond with a chorus of "Roger, Roger." A data overflow error doesn't identify generationally, locate itself in a historical taxonomy, and then perform that identity for nearby units. Something about that specific documented moment strains the maintenance neglect explanation past its useful limit. The academic essay of Battle Droids and Zillo Beasts, Moral Status in the Star Wars Galaxy, published in a Wiley academic collection on Star Wars philosophy, engages the question directly: whether battle droids have any claim to moral consideration in this universe, and what the behavioral record actually supports. It doesn't produce a clean verdict. The evidence is substantial enough to require examination rather than dismissal. The franchise itself never fully committed to that observation. The OOM series in The Phantom Menace occupied a planet, captured a queen, and defeated an indigenous army in field combat. Functionally silent, operationally methodical, handled by the film as a genuine military threat requiring serious tactical response. Within the Clone Wars' first 2 seasons, the direction had clearly shifted. The official StarWars.com editorial team eventually published a piece titled 7 Times Battle Droids Made Us Laugh Out Loud, the franchise in its own voice celebrating what its frontline soldiers had become. No verified public statements from Dave Filoni or George Lucas specifically explaining the decision to lean into battle droid comedy survived into the documented record. The creative rationale was never publicly disclosed. What is confirmed is that the shift sustained across multiple seasons and received official franchise endorsement. 2 defensible positions exist on this, and the script isn't resolving either one. The argument against the comedic portrayal is structural. A fundamentally buffoonish enemy proportionally cheapens any hero who defeats one. The political tragedy the Separatist cause carries, genuine member system grievances, legitimate industrial factions, a movement manipulated by a Sith's long-term planning into destroying itself, becomes dramatically incoherent when the ground troops are punchlines. The tonal dissonance is real, and the critique is coherent. The argument in favor is that personality and humor arrived as the same phenomenon. A droid becoming more itself was also becoming more recognizable as a category of person. The unit that expresses visible reluctance before a suicidal order, that identifies generationally in front of its peers, that registers surprise and confusion in combat. That droid is considerably more memorable than the silent machine at Naboo. The OOM series had more advanced programming by design, and yet the standard B1 is the one every Star Wars fan can quote from memory. Whether the cognitive downgrade produced a more enduring cultural object is genuinely unresolved, and the OOM/B1 distinction, smarter predecessor, more beloved successor, is its own argument worth running. Past the debate, examine what the B1 was as a weapon system at operational peak. Standard armament was the E5 blaster rifle, manufactured by Bactoid Armor Workshop. The Star Wars Saga Edition role-playing sourcebook, published in 2007, prices a single B1 at 1,800 credits. The Fantasy Flight Games Force and Destiny rulebook puts a single IG-100 Magna Guard at 90,000 credits, 50 B1s for one elite bodyguard unit. The B1's doctrine was quantity, and the numbers behind that doctrine aren't abstract. The Separatist Droid Army's Legends organizational structure placed 4,368 droids in a regiment. A single Lucrehulk-class battleship carried a total surface assault force of 218,000 droids. Atomic Mass Games, the current official licensed tabletop manufacturer for Star Wars, states in its product materials that even the finest soldiers can be broken under the crushing weight of B1 battle droid legions. That is the licensed franchise acknowledging in print that the swarm doctrine functions. 1B1 in a corridor is a minor inconvenience. 10,000 on an open approach is a resource problem that clone commanders solved repeatedly only through combined arms coordination, not because individual B1s were formidable, but because their replacement cost approached 0. Clone-era B1s operated fully independently of any command ship. They functioned in vacuum, extreme temperatures, and toxic environments that killed organic soldiers outright. No logistics tail. No food, no medical support, no psychological casualties, no sleep requirements. Their vulnerability to EMP and ion weapons was real and regularly exploited by clone troopers. That vulnerability also becomes operationally irrelevant against an enemy whose entire weapons arsenal runs on biology rather than electronics. The question of whether a pure mass B1 doctrine would have changed the Clone Wars outcome is genuinely unresolved. One CIS doctrine, 50 Magna Guards. The alternative? 2,500 B1s for the same budget. Which one holds a contested planet when the Republic's gunships arrive? No definitive answer exists, and that specific calculation has been generating debate since the Saga Edition sourcebook published those numbers in 2007. The Yuuzhan Vong crossed into the galaxy from beyond the Outer Rim approximately 25 ABY, roughly 25 years after the B1s went dark. They were religious zealots who considered mechanical technology an abomination and built everything from living organisms: weapons, armor, ships, surgical modification. Their anti-technology theology wasn't incidental. It was the organizing principle of their civilization. The New Jedi Order novels document the discovery that defined the entire conflict. The Yuuzhan Vong exist entirely outside the Force. They can't be detected through it. A Jedi searching for enemy positions through the Force finds nothing. No presence, no darkness, no void that registers as significant. The Force is functionally blind to them, and every tactical system the Republic and New Jedi Order had built around Force-aided command and communication was compromised at the strategic level from the war's first weeks. B1 battle droids don't use the Force to target. They use optical and sensor arrays. The Vong are physically present and physically substantial. The droids' Force blindness, the characteristic the galaxy spent 20 years treating as irrelevant, was never a limitation against an enemy that operates in physical space. The Vong's weapon systems reinforce the point from the other direction. Von Dune crab armor, documented in the New Jedi Order Dark Tide II, Ruin, carried an energy field generated by a biological power gland that deflected the atomic diameter edge of a lightsaber blade. Dark Tide II also documents the armor's vulnerability. Bafor tree pollen triggered a lethal allergic reaction in the Von Dune crab organism, causing the shell to swell and kill its wearer. The material was engineered against specific threats. The Vong's own biological history suggests those threats were organic. Standard blaster fire is a different category of problem entirely. Coom spores, engineered by Vong executor Nam Anor, infected organic hosts and killed them over a prolonged timeline through biological contact. Mara Jade Skywalker spent years across the opening New Jedi Order campaigns conducting active command responsibilities while those spores worked through her system. Her condition threads through multiple novels as an ongoing constraint on her operational capacity. The spores require organic cellular structure to propagate. No cellular structure, no infection vector. A B1 is entirely metal, polymer, and circuitry. The Voxen were creatures bred specifically to hunt Jedi. Their construction and deployment is documented across the New Jedi Order series, most extensively around the Strike Team Mirkr mission, by tracking Force signatures across crowded environments. They identified targets through Force presence and pursued them with lethal focus. A B1 battle droid produces no Force signature. A Voxen registers its presence through optical sense alone, no different from approaching a wall. Every weapon the Vong deployed with decisive effect against Republic and Jedi forces required organic tissue, Force presence, or both to function as designed. The B1 satisfies neither condition. The New Republic eventually commissioned a purpose-built counterforce, the YVH series, Yuuzhan Vong Hunter Droids, designed and produced specifically for this conflict. They were effective. The problem was timeline. Building a new droid army from scratch during an active invasion consumed resources, and manufacturing capacity the Republic was simultaneously burning to survive. The New Jedi Order series documents losses on a civilizational scale. Entire systems depopulated, Coruscant itself falling, decades of Jedi institutional knowledge erased in single engagements. The B-1 battle droid was already built, quintillions of them, sitting silent in storage depots across former CIS systems, immune to every weapon the Vong brought, invisible to the only detection method Vong warriors were trained to counter. The Separatist Droid Army's Legends documentation records a unit called the Orange Panthax, a privately owned B-2 super battle droid platoon active during the Yuuzhan-Vong War period. Reportedly, they engaged Vong forces. The B-2 is a heavier variant than the standard B-1, but the significant fact is that old Separatist hardware reached the conflict at all, that the matchup was notable enough to enter the record. The specific engagement details sit in Legends territory, where primary sourcebook verification is still worth doing before treating them as fully settled history. One additional production detail. Lucasfilm's own documentation of unfinished Clone Wars story arcs, referenced in published academic research on the show's development and confirmed in Lucasfilm's own Untold Stories panel materials, lists the Yuuzhan Vong as one of 4 Legends story elements that reached serious development consideration before the series' 2013 cancellation. The Vong were going to appear in the Clone Wars. Both the B-1 battle droid and the Yuuzhan Vong were in the same cancelled story, and neither got the confrontation the lore had been building toward for years. A handful of B-1s survived the shutdown. Temmin Wexley built one called Mr. Bones, a heavily modified unit with a lethal personality, appearing across Chuck Wendig's Aftermath trilogy. The droid Gotra, documented in Tarkin, was an underground network of repurposed Clone Wars veterans with documented grievances against an empire that discarded them after their service ended. Both are genuine footnotes against the quintillion. The shutdown itself requires one clarification the film doesn't provide. It wasn't automatic. In Revenge of the Sith, Palpatine explicitly orders Vader to transmit the message. Vader does so manually through the Separatist Master Control Network. Dark Lord, the Rise of Darth Vader, fills in the result. Droids on distant worlds going silent as the signal propagates outward until the entire army stops. General Kalani, commanding the Agamar garrison, refused the order, concluded it was a Republic trick, and maintained his B-1 force operational for years into the Imperial period. A holdout on Sai-Mirth sustained an active navy under former Senator Toonbuk Tura long enough to require a dedicated Imperial campaign to suppress. The exceptions confirm something. The droids with sufficient independent processing to doubt the order, or whose communications were cut off before the signal arrived, kept functioning. They didn't disintegrate. They continued to operate exactly as their upgraded architecture allowed. Palpatine needed them shut down because quintillions of units developing emergent behaviors and explicitly calling themselves independent thinkers were a political liability for a new regime requiring a monopoly on organized force. The maintenance-neglect explanation for B-1 personality development is probably accurate as a mechanical description of origin. A malfunction that produces documented fear responses, generational self-identification, self-preservation instincts that override base programming, and unprompted identity performance for nearby units has started doing something that the word malfunction was never quite designed to contain. They were the first mass-produced beings in galactic history to start asking why they were fighting. The Empire's answer was to make sure they couldn't ask anymore. 25 years later, a civilization armed exclusively with organic bioweapons arrived at the galaxy's edge, and the defenders, who were immune to every tool in that civilization's arsenal, were stacked in storage depots across 100 systems, waiting for an order that never came. The case against the B-1 was always that it was cheap and disposable. The prosecution never considered what the galaxy would need when the enemy arrived, who only killed things that could bleed. Subscribe for more stories like this.